disorder.
Of course, there's ADD and there's also ADHD. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has prominent symptoms of inattention, of course, hyperactivity. Impulsivity is very high with these select individuals, or a combination of any of the two. At least some symptoms may have caused impairment before the age of 12, usually the hyperactivity or the impulsivity. They must be present in at least 2 different settings. In other words, if you're just ADHD at home, then you probably don't have ADHD. I told you about my grandson who will eat anything at school, but he won't eat anything at home. As confusing as that is. He'll even eat broccoli at school, raw broccoli, but he won't eat broccoli at home. So sometimes people are that way. Anyway, so they have to show this in more than one setting. Academic, occupational, or social functioning. ADHD is a leading cause of referrals for youth to mental health care. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is much more commonly diagnosed in males and females, approximately 2-to-1 ratio for males to females. Used to be 4-to-1, now it's 2-to-1. The diagnosis has changed. And for that reason, females are more likely to. So women are more likely, or females are more likely to be diagnosed now than before. Am I even here today? All of the weekend I read papers all weekend. So if I read your paper, I hope I didn't say anything mean. I was pretty out of it most of the weekend. Most often, attention hyperactivity disorder becomes apparent when a child enters school and is required to remain in the seat for periods of time. Prevalence of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is estimated at about 5% of school-aged children. Since none of you are from the north, I can tell you that there was a school up on the Fort Belknap Reservation. 51% of the individuals were on Ritalin. They were on Ritalin. Had been diagnosed with ADHD. Any ideas what causes this stuff? Do we see this in select individuals because of something that they did during their pregnancy?
I've always wondered that.
Is that a possibility? Yeah, we see this in FA with individuals that drank during their pregnancy. We also see this with people that smoked during their pregnancy. We also see it with people who smoke marijuana during their pregnancy. So, I mean, we have all of them. I mean, anything that you did that you shouldn't have done potentially could cause ADHD. When we were talking about, FAS. FAE, this is one of the symptoms of FAE, is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. As children mature, the condition usually becomes less obvious and often attenuates significantly by late adolescence. Attenuates means weakens, so it attenuates by the time they are teenagers. Usually it's because they've learned to deal with it. They've learned to pay attention or pretend they're paying attention. And that's why it has attenuated. Family and twin studies indicate a strong genetic component to ADHD. As I told you before, it seems to be on the same gene as schizophrenia, autism, and bipolar disorder and major depression. Now, if you think about this, which one is the least intrusive? Which one is, are you the most functional? Out of autism, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, and ADHD. Which one is the least intrusive? The one that would cause you the least harm? Probably ADHD. So, and potentially we should be happy that we have so few individuals that they have ADHD instead of schizophrenia or autism. Reduced levels of activity in particular areas of the brain, including the frontal lobe, basal ganglia, and the cerebellum. have been shown to occur with ADHD. DSM-5 reports that low birth weight may be associated with threefold increase in risk for ADHD. So here we have low birth weight babies, we have women who smoke, women who toke, and women who drink during their pregnancy as possible reasons for their... What, you've never heard the term toke before?
I think we were just surprised to hear you say it.
I saw it on television. Oh, hey, this is exciting. I wonder if this is my wife.
He's all right.
Oh, it is my wife. Hello? Hi, I'm in class. That's okay, that's okay. I'll call you when I'm done. Bye. Who knows what you wanted to tell me? Usually it's, come home and get these damn dogs. What's wrong with you? All three of my dogs are from the res, so it's you guys' fault that we're having problems with the dogs. Damn it. They're actually very sweet dogs. Okay. The specific causes of ADHD remain unidentified, but we do have different reasons for people to have ADHD. We do know of different reasons. Stimulant medications such as methylphenidate, which is actually Ritalin, have been shown to reduce the symptoms of ADHD in the short term and are effective for about 70% of the children, compared to about 10% for placebos. So if methylphenidate works on 70%, what's going on with those other 30%? If it doesn't work on everybody, what the hell's going on? So who are those other 30%? Could it be that they're misdiagnosed? That they've got other problems? Maybe it's the environment that causes them to be ADHD? I mean, if I throw Ritalin at somebody that really doesn't have ADHD, is it going to fix them? No, it's not. Okay, so about 30, which tells me that about 30% of the people that they're treating for ADHD don't really have ADHD. They have something else. Something else is going on. While useful in the short term, the medications do not appear to have long-term effectiveness, and they may stunt growth. 3-year follow-up of the multimodal treatment study of children with ADHD found that although medication produced greater improvements in behavior therapy, at the conclusion of treatment, there were no group differences between medication, behavior therapy, or a combination of those on any measure 2 years later. Okay, so does it work or does it not work? Well, that's the question. There is no evidence that treatment with stimulant medication is associated with a reduction in later risk for substance abuse. And we have talked about this. We talked about this over the years, thinking that here we are, we're setting these kids up for problems in the future. Here we are, we're hitting them with Ritalin all of their throughout their youth. So we're just making them drug addicts in the future. And of course, there is no proof that that actually happens. The American Psychological Association's Task Force on Pharmacological, Psychosocial, and Combined Interventions for Childhood Disorders recommended that children should first receive a trial of psychosocial intervention for ADHD before the medication is initiated. Is this what is happening? Are we treating them with some type of therapy before we give them medication? Hell no. Yeah, not just no, but hell no. Of course we're not. Because who's the one that's giving them the medication? It's doctors, it's MDs, it's DOs, it's those crazy people that want to see you for 5 minutes and then get their $150. Sure. So they're certainly not treating them with anything other than the medication. Not only that, but we've got parents going in and demanding those drugs. So what's the easiest thing for that doctor? To argue with that mother? Hell no. He's just going to juice up them kids. He doesn't care. Well, that's what she wants. That's what she's going to get. And that's what she does get. The incidence of ADHD has increased dramatically over the past 3 decades. This may partially stem from practices intended to improve diagnostic reliability through the use of standardized rating scales. Although ADHD is observed in other countries, American children are more likely to receive the diagnosis than any other country. Does it mean there's something wrong with us in the United States? Actually, there's one country that has more ADHD diagnosed children than the United States. And you'll never guess it in a million years. It's India. So is there something wrong with our kids in the United States? We have all these ADHD kids. Is it the mother's fault? Sometimes. She's being bad during her pregnancy. 80 to 90% of methylphenidate is prescribed for American children in spite of the lack of evidence of long-term effectiveness. We know it doesn't work long-term. The stimulant medications are not specific for ADHD, and drug response is not a validation of the diagnosis. Another problem that we may have is, you just juice them up with Ritalin, we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to pay attention to it. That makes sense. I know. Instead of babysitting our kids, why don't we just turn the damn television on or let them play video games? That works. They'll play those video games like all day. Are we helping these kids out at all? Let's use television. That's what I used when I was a parent. I just turned on the damn television and let the kids watch television. Of course, television back then wasn't nearly as good as it is today. Back then, we only had 3 channels, or was it 6? Maybe we had 6 channels. Anyway, but you guys have what, 200? You can turn on like SpongeBob all day. You can binge watch SpongeBob all day. You can watch Big Bang Theory on different channels all day long. It's like every channel has Big Bang Theory on. Anyway, we can do that. Normal men and boys respond similarly to stimulant drugs as ADHD boys. ADHD rating scales, which focus only on symptom presence, result in many false positives. And of course, that is our problem, that we have false positives. So what do we do with the false positives? Well, we treat them with Ritalin, of course. There are no laboratory tests, neurological assessments, physical features, or attentional assessments that are diagnostic for ADHD. So I can't look at somebody and tell if they're ADHD. Well, I can, but it's because they're hyperactive. But maybe they're hyperactive because they don't like me. That's a possibility. Or maybe they don't want to talk to somebody as short as I am. Maybe they want somebody tall with a beard. There are many non-ADHD causes for hyperactive behavior in children, including sleep disturbances, side effects of asthma, medication, hearing impairment, child abuse, inadequate parenting, and onset of other conditions or difficulties. The most common is inadequate parenting, of course. They don't want to pay attention to that damn kid, and that's just the way it works sometimes. We had a neighbor, and he couldn't talk very well, but he was hyperactive. This kid was just bouncing off the walls all the time. And so sometimes, mom and dad would take off. This is in Germany. Mom and dad would take off, and they would leave us with the kid. And geez, we're chasing this kid all over the place. This is in a little town in Germany. And sometimes he'd get on the street, and he'd run up the mountain, and he'd run back down the mountain, run up the mountain. Of course, you have to chase him. You don't want him, running into a tractor and breaking the tractor or something. Anyway, it turned out, and he couldn't talk. He spoke with a really bad speech impediment. He was like 4 or 5 years old. Nobody had ever tried to figure out what was going on. As military doctors, every time he went in, he saw a new doctor, and it was one of those kind of deals. But eventually, somebody finally looked at his ears, and it turned out that he had impacted ears. His ears were full of fluid. And he'd had so many ear infections that it was just globbed in there like mucus that won't come out of your nose. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so he was hearing the world through a glob of snot in both ears. So he couldn't, he wasn't hearing words correctly. And they started sending him to a speech pathologist because he couldn't talk. And he was also ADHD. Now these are all symptoms of, these are all symptoms of hearing problems. And he did have a hearing problem, but once they cleared his ears out, they put tubes in his ears and they drained all that goop out of there. He started hearing better, and once he started hearing better, he stopped acting like he had ADHD. He would actually listen to you. Before he would never listen to anybody. Of course, he couldn't hear you. That was his problem. Anyway, so once they got the gloop out of his ears, everything was fine. Disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders involve behavior that tends to bring the person into conflict with authority, often shown as impulsive or poorly controlled violations of social rules. They're doing the wrong thing. Like the neurodevelopmental disorders, they are more common in males than females. And you'll probably, if you go to any place where there's a large group of individuals, a lot more boys are acting out than little girls are acting out. As a matter of fact, you rarely see little girls act out. There's sugar and spice, and everything nice. You write that down, sugar and spice. Included in this section and double listed in the DSM-5 is antisocial personality disorder. I love these guys. These guys are so much fun. These people with conduct disorder. Have you ever been around a kid that won't listen to you? And you tell them to do something and they say something smart like, you're not my father, you can't tell me what to do. You're just trying to keep them from running out in the street and getting killed. So instead of doing that, you're throwing them on the street, hoping that they'll get hit by. No, I'm just kidding. You certainly wouldn't do that. But this is a problem that you have with these guys. Distinguishing features of oppositional defiant disorder are recurrent disobedience and hostility toward authority figures. Normally, you don't have to worry about this, but of course, you see these kids if you talk to them. If you talk to them, they don't want to hear anything that you say. Sometimes they won't listen to you at all. They just walk away. Don't walk into that wall, and that kid walks right into the wall, of course. And this can be a really serious problem. So we know who they are going to be. Of course, we don't diagnose them until they get into school, and they start disobeying the teacher. Diagnostic criteria for oppositional defiant disorder includes often losing one's temper, blaming others for one's own mistakes or misbehavior, and being easily annoyed. And of course, this is fairly obvious. These are the kids that are in Walmart banging their feet on the ground, demanding that they get a toy or whatever. And of course, mom. So what does mom do? What does she do? She gives them the toy, of course. Of course she does. Mom's not silly. She's so embarrassed that this kid's making all that noise at Walmart. We want to impress all of our friends at Walmart. It's the place, that's where I want to impress people. The diagnosis requires the weekly presence of 4 such symptoms for a period of at least 6 months. This is a tantrum. We're talking about temper tantrums here. If the person is under 5 years of age, symptoms are required nearly every day to qualify for the diagnosis. In other words, they're throwing temper tantrums with their parents, with their caregivers, whoever their caregivers are, whether it's mom, dad, their grandparents, or aunts and uncles, whoever it may happen to be. They have to do this every day. Okay. Now, usually kids will have a certain caregiver that they won't act out for. And usually it doesn't have anything to do with spanking. It usually has to do with interest. They are more interested in impressing this person. The severity of oppositional defiant disorder can be specified as mild, where the symptoms in only one setting, like the store, the kid always acts out at the store, or school, or home, whichever the case may be. Obviously, my grandson has a problem because he won't eat whatever food my daughter makes for him. But he'll eat anything at school, anything. He finds a piece of gum that's rolling around in the dirt, picks it up and eats it. He'll eat broccoli, and kids will not eat broccoli ever, but he'll eat raw broccoli at school. I know, it's really kind of bizarre. Of Cook up some broccoli for him, put a little salt and lemon on it, or butter, nothing. He won't touch it. Moderate symptoms in 2 settings, severe symptoms in 3 or more settings. Usually onset is before the age of 8, and it commonly precedes the development of conduct disorder, strongly comorbid with ADHD and conduct disorder, of course, and that's oppositional defiant disorder, better known as ODD. Some samples have reported incidence of oppositional defiant disorder as high as 11%, but they averaged about 3.3%. Before puberty, the disorder is more common in males, but after puberty, males and females are about equal. Training programs for parents of children with oppositional defiant disorder are among the most well-established, empirically validated treatments that we have. The reality is what we do is we teach them how to parent and how to be mean to their kids. Okay. Or, you know what the problem is. The kid gets to do whatever the hell the kid wants to do. Conduct disorder involves repetitive, persistent violations of rules, socially appropriate norms, and the rights of others. It sounds like antisocial personality disorder, doesn't it? Well, this kid's on the road to antisocial personality disorder. Often they take the form of aggression, damaging property. These kids vandalize. They will destroy anything. Not only do they destroy their own toys, but when they go to the playground, they try to destroy the playground. Damage property, deceitfulness, theft, and serious rule violations. The pattern is usually evident in a variety of settings over a 12-month period, and it must cause serious impairment in academic, occupational, and social functioning. This has to be relatively serious. So we don't diagnose these kids. These aren't just the bad kids, these are the really bad kids. These are the kids that have been causing trouble over a 12-month period. Conduct disorder may be diagnosed in adults, but only in the absence of adult antisocial personality disorder. Normally, if it's an adult, we will diagnose them with antisocial personality disorder. Prognosis is poor in childhood onset type of conduct disorder and in relation to the with limited prosocial emotion specifier. In other words, if the individual doesn't seem to care what anybody thinks in the society, then we have a really poor prognosis. If this kid starts vandalizing as a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, the younger they are when they start showing these symptoms, the worse the prognosis. The probability is that we're not going to be able to condition it out of them. We used to talk about this back in the old days. We used to talk about what was going to happen with these kids, and we realized that if we can't catch them and can't condition it out of them before the age of 3, if they're showing this type of oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder before the age of 3, there's nothing we can do because we can't condition it out of them after that. So if we've got a bad kid, and this is a bad kid, as soon as they start walking, we got a really serious problem, especially if we don't get a hold of them really early. Now you can condition it out of them. You can use behavior modification. You can actually condition this really mean streak out of these kids. It seems like they're born with it. I mean, they're just naturally mean. They're mean to their brothers. They're mean to animals. They're mean to their parents. And if we can't get a hold of them early enough, there's not a whole lot we can do. They're just going to end up in jail. Commonly, conduct disorder co-occurs with ADHD and is also associated with mood disorders, anxiety disorders, learning disorders, and substance use disorders. So what's the problem? What is really the problem that we have with these individuals? The problem is we can't get them to do what they need to do in order to get better. So they seem depressed. They seem like they're overly anxious all the time. They seem to have learning disorders because we can't make them sit down and learn. So they may not actually have a learning disorder. It may just be that they don't want to play. If they're going to school, they just don't want to play. They want to sit in the back of the room. No offense to those of you in the back of the room. They'll sit in the back of the room and and play video games on their computers. Incidence appears to have increased in the past few decades and may be as high as 10% of the general population, although median estimates are closer to 4%. So why does it seem so bad? 10% of the population. Really? 10%. That's 1 out of every 10 kids. That's like the whole back row. Why? Why now? What's going on? Why is it worse now than it was before? What's going on in our society? Good stuff, bad stuff? Obviously it's bad stuff. It must be bad stuff. But what is it? Why can't we get these kids to do what they're supposed to do? Why can't society control them?
Media.
The media? Aren't we using the media as our parents?
Oh, yeah. Disciplinary, yeah.
What was your question again?
What's wrong with these kids? What's wrong with society? Why are we making so many of these kids? Could it be marijuana? Let's pretend it's not. Let's pretend it's not alcohol. Let's pretend it's not cocaine. Let's pretend it's not marijuana. Let's pretend it's not any of those things that people are doing. What else is happening in society?
Sean is because of different
Yeah.
What do they do all day? What do these kids do all day? Video.
Yeah.
And phones. I keep walking to the post office and I'll say hi to people if they're not down like this. Or they have those buds in their ears. What are they listening to? Music, probably music. But they're not paying attention to the society. They live in their own little world.
Cardi B.
And the rap music uses the F word all the time, right? I'm sure that doesn't have anything to do with it. Look at all those military people that use that word over and over and over again, and we're just perfectly fine, right? There's nothing wrong with us whatsoever. It must be the video games. Okay, let's pretend it's the video games. I know. Now the thing is that you guys are the ones that are going to have to deal with this. In the future, gee, I have no clue what's going to happen next. We're thinking of embedding chips in people's brains so that they could just punch it, I don't know, and make a telephone call. You're connected with people all the time. My wife just called me on the phone. You heard of her. She called me on the phone, but I'll call her back. But people are on their phones constantly. I was at that board thing. The president of the college wasn't paying attention to what was going on. He was flipping through his emails or something. What he was doing? He was playing with his damn telephone. You were right back behind him. You saw him. Monty, he was there playing on his telephone. I can get fired. I'll get.
I see that a lot.
I know.
Yeah.
Why is the telephone so important to everybody?
It shouldn't be.
It's obviously not important to me. This is the first time I remembered my phone in 2 weeks. So. My wife tries to call me. Oh man, I'm sure Travis has the answer. He just won't give it to us. Anyway, you guys are going to have to deal with this. I'm not going to have to deal with this whole video game thing. Is it going to get worse? What are the video games about now? I mean, they were playing Halo before. I don't have any clue what they're playing now. I don't know.
Yeah.
Fortnite. I don't know what it is, but
You're going to have to deal with it. If they're teaching people to make headshots, of course you have to shoot a zombie in the head. Everybody knows that. I know. We're going to have everybody using AR-15. Everybody else. Or AK-47. Actually, the AR-15 is a much more accurate weapon. What's going on? Okay, so we have a huge percentage of the population, we've got this problem. Conduct disorder tends to run in families and is more likely when parents or siblings have antisocial personality disorder, conduct disorder, substance use disorder, mood disorder, or ADHD. My God, that's like the whole population. Somebody in your family has antisocial personality disorder, conduct disorder, substance use disorder, mood disorders, or ADHD. My goodness, that's like everybody. Other predisposing factors include parental rejection or neglect, use of harsh discipline, physical or sexual abuse, lack of supervision, peer rejection, below normal IQ, and early institutional living. Both genetic and environmental factors are involved in its development. Wow. Love this picture. Behavioral techniques have been effectively employed to treat antisocial and oppositional conduct in children and adolescents. It is key to train parents in behavior management skills and train both parents and children in problem-solving approaches. Group-based treatments may result in increased rather than decreased problem behavior. Once again, we're going to put these kids in group, and guess what happens next? Now they all start acting how the worst person in the class acts. They're learning bad behavior from all the other kids in the group. And so this is not a very good way of doing things. Inadvertently reinforcing the deviant root values, of course, is one of the problems with putting them in group. Increasing contact with peers who model inappropriate behaviors. Normalizing skewed perceptions about the prevalence of delinquent activities. So don't put them in a group setting. It's like sending somebody to prison. What did you learn in prison? How to be a really good bad guy or criminal. So the same thing happens with these kids. So don't send them to a reformatory. In the old days, that's what we used to do. We used to send them to the reformatory. Well, all they did was learn how to be better criminals. And so it didn't work. Of course, we did this for years because it was easier than dealing with the problem. We don't do this kind of stuff anymore. We try not to. Some states still do, however. Intermittent explosive disorder involves recurrent outbursts of verbal or physical aggressiveness, episodes involving failure to resist aggressive impulses. So they punch somebody, or they bite somebody, or they get so angry that they attack somebody. Intermittent explosive disorder may include destruction of property, physical attacks that injure others, or verbal threats of assault. The aggressive act, sometimes accompanied by strong emotions, is grossly out of proportion to any provocation or precipitating stress. These episodes are often very distressing to the individual as well as the people around them who are being attacked by them. Diagnosis of intermittent explosive disorder cannot be given before the age of 6. Kids haven't figured it out yet. They haven't really been in a social setting, so we really can't diagnose it before the age of 6. Onset is usually in late childhood, usually just before puberty. We will see these kids start to explode in various circumstances. Lifetime prevalence rate may be 7.3% of the population, with average onset at age 14 and lifetime average of 43 attacks. What happens every time they attack somebody? They probably go to jail. Probably. 43 is a lot. Most people with intermittent explosive disorder also have other disorders which complicates the diagnostic process. Diagnosis requires the aggression not be explained by the effects of a substance or general medical condition, but of course these individuals will try to self-medicate. So the problem is, are they a drunk, or is it the fact that they are just angry like this? Do they have intermittent explosive disorder? Which is it? And that's the problem. So if they are a drinker, and because society, we make excuses for people that drink, that is usually the diagnosis, if they've been drinking. They also smoke pot. And they smoke a lot of cigarettes. These individuals will smoke a lot of cigarettes. As if they had schizophrenia. Chain smoke, because it makes them feel better. The central feature of kleptomania is an irresistible urge to steal items that are not needed either for personal use or for their value. Let me tell you a couple of quick stories. When I was in college, we had a discus store, really good. This guy was like second or third in the country. A really good discus store. And you're going, why didn't you go to a bigger school? Why did you go to Wabash? Well, the reason he went to Wabash was because he did try to go to bigger schools, but he was a kleptomaniac. He kept stealing things and getting kicked out of school. And his father would bail him out. His father was fairly wealthy. This kid had all the money that he needed. He just liked to steal things. And so he would go to the stores. They tried to send him to Lafayette, they tried to send him to Bloomington, and of course those are big, relatively big towns. When they sent him to Crawfordsville, he started stealing things in Crawfordsville. Well, there's only 5 or 6 different stores, so the father had an account at all of these stores where he's stealing all this stuff, and they'd follow him around and they'd watch him steal things, and then of course his father would buy them. Now this father had lots of money, the kid had lots of money, that wasn't the problem. He would take this stuff and he would give them to his friends. He was in a fraternity and he would give them to his friends. And eventually he graduated from college. He was able to make it through with his father paying for all this stuff that he stole. Some of the silliest things you could possibly imagine. Now, this is an all-male college. Why in the world would you steal a box of Kotexes? Why would you do that? Just because. I don't know. He just did it. So when I was in the service, we had a shortstop. I used to play Air Force level softball. And we had a shortstop, and he was the nicest guy in the whole wide world. Well, one time, this is in Germany, we're going to a ball tournament in Amsterdam. So we're driving down the Autobahn. We get off the Autobahn so that we can all, evacuate. We can all use the restroom and buy a drink or a candy bar or whatever we wanted. And so we're all just kind of wandering out to the van. And all of a sudden, Ray comes running out of the store, and he jumps in the van. He says, get in, really quick, get in quick. And it turned out that he'd stolen a pair of sunglasses. Well, Ray already had a pair of sunglasses. It's not like he needed those sunglasses, but he was a kleptomaniac too. And we talked about this. Of course, I was a psychologist at the time, wasn't I? Yes, I was a psychologist at the time. So Ray and I had a long session, and evidently he'd been doing this since he was a kid. But he was a good-looking kid. Everybody loved him. He was a really good softball. He was a good ball player, and people would excuse all this stuff because he was such a good-looking kid. And us ugly guys, we can't get away with that stuff, but Ray did. Anyway, there's 2 instances where I came in contact with a kleptomaniac. Was I able to fix Ray? No, Ray got kicked off base. They were about to take a stripe away from him, but he was so cute that they didn't take his stripe away. And I was so irritated. And he's the nicest. He's a good shortstop too. It's a really good shortstop. Anyway, so what's happening here? Kleptomania. For people with kleptomania, a growing sense of tension is experienced before stealing, replaced by pleasure and relief after the theft occurs. People with this disorder know that the theft is wrong and they may fear being caught and arrested. They often feel guilty afterward, kinda. These 2 guys kinda did. Ray felt bad. I mean, he's ripped this German off from the sunglasses. I don't know, they were like $25 sunglasses. They were pretty expensive. Stealing may be chronic and continue for years despite a series of arrests and convictions. And in his case, of course, nobody turned him in. I certainly didn't turn him in. And the coach didn't turn him in because he was afraid he would lose him as a shortstop. What's more important? The fact that he was a thief or the fact he was a good shortstop? Which is the most important thing? You're right. The fact that he was a good shortstop. That was the most important thing. So we'll let him get away with it. People who suffer from kleptomania have a high rate of hoarding, but individuals often report amnesia from the theft event. Neither of these individuals did. As a matter of fact, they used to brag about how they got away with things. They were really good at putting things in their pants. You can figure that one out if you like. They would slip things down into the front of their pants. Comorbid conditions most often include major depressive disorder, anxiety and eating disorders, and other impulse control disorders. Kleptomania usually begins by adolescence. Prevalence in the general population for kleptomania is less than 1%, so there's not that many people with kleptomania. 3/4 of these individuals are female shoplifters. Used to have a good friend up north. He had a lady friend from another reservation. We won't mention the bad reservation. But she would steal coats. She was a coat thief. What she would do, she would take her coat off and she'd put the other coat underneath it, and then she'd put her other coat on. And so I know, and I helped them move, and they must have had 50 coats. 50 coats of all descriptions. She was just a kleptomaniac. I have no idea what she did with all those coats. They had box after box of coats. Nice coats. I know, really weird. 3/4 are females, so there's something wrong with women. We finally figured it out. They're kleptomaniacs. There have been some positive reports involving naltrexone, an opiate receptor blocker, for reducing urges to steal, but overall data is mixed. No pharmacological treatment is supported by controlled studies, so we can't give them antidepressants, we can't give them anti-anxiety drugs. Case reports suggest that covert sensitization and exposure and response prevention have been effective behavioral interventions, but no well-controlled studies have been published. I have a list of kleptomaniacs. Are you ready? Some of these people you probably have heard of, but I didn't know who the hell they were. This is Caroline Giuliani. She's the daughter of Rudy Giuliani, and she lives in New York City. She's a kleptomaniac. As cool as that is. This is Stephanie Pratt. I guess she's on some television show. I don't know her. Anyway, she's a kleptomaniac. She actually has clothes on. Tia Tequila. I know, when I first looked at the picture, I was going, I'm not exactly sure if she does. I think she does. I'm pretty sure she does. Anyway, has anybody heard of Tia Tequila? No? Okay, wait a minute.
It's like on an MTV show.
Really? Peaches Geldof, she's an English lady. She actually gives all of her stuff away. She's a billionaire. She has $1 billion, but she steals stuff. Rex Reed is an old actor. Had a really serious kleptomaniac problem. This is Jennifer Capriati. She was a tennis player. She had a problem with putting things on and not paying for it, walking out of the store with them. Anyway, Jennifer Capriati. Winona Ryder, you may have remembered the incident with Winona Ryder. She had stuff in her handbag, and she had on 2 dresses, evidently, one on top of the other. Good old Winona. And she was in Beetlejuice, one of my favorite movies. Farrah Fawcett. I know, who would have thought Farrah Fawcett had all the money in the world, yet she kept stealing things. Dresses were her favorite. Okay. Huh?
Who's that?
Farrah Fawcett? How about Britney Spears? Have you ever heard of Britney Spears? She's a notorious kleptomaniac. She doesn't pay for anything. And people think it's because she thinks that the person behind her is going to pay for it. Because she's so, I don't know, Britney, I guess. Anyway, Britney Spears is a kleptomaniac. And Lindsay Lohan is a kleptomaniac. Pyromania involves multiple episodes of intentional fire setting. The urge to start a fire is accompanied by increasing tension or arousal, and pleasure or relief accompanies the fire and its aftermath. Individuals are fascinated by fire and are attracted to and curious about all aspects of fire, including paraphernalia, fire alarms, and firefighting. Although pyromania is an impulse control disorder, fires are not often set on impulse. The person is frequently indifferent to the possible loss of life or destruction of property that may result. I come from a certain area in Indiana. We had all these Victorian farmhouses that were at all of these farmsteads. And at some point, an individual came and burned all these houses. Well, my parents live in a Victorian house. And they were one of these Victorian homesteads. And one night, a man came in, or it was actually a couple guys came in, and my dad scared them away. But they had burned the house next door and the house, 2 houses down. They had burned that. Of course, this is Indiana, so when I say it's like a half a mile away, okay? The house next door is a half a mile away. Anyway, they burned 4 houses before they finally were caught. But they were pyromaniacs. Pyromania is more common among males with poor social skills or learning difficulties and associated with conduct disorder and ADHD in juveniles. Both of these individuals had dropped out of school. They're both in their teens. It is common for fire setters to have a history of alcohol use disorder. As a matter of fact, that's how they were started. They were doing Molotov cocktails, and instead of gasoline, they were using Everclear and vodka, or vodka. I know they were using that as a bomb. So, and sometimes they worked, and sometimes they didn't. Prevalence is unknown in the population, but 3.3% of fire setters in the criminal justice system may qualify for the diagnosis. Classic psychoanalytic theory considered pyromania to be a symbolic sexual act. She's so hot. Wait a minute. And now we're setting fires. Wait a minute, this is interesting. Pyromania sometimes occurs in the context of fetishism. Others have proposed that pyromania is a form of communication, aggression, or self-destructiveness by juveniles with limited social skills. Suicidal thoughts or acts are very common with these individuals. Sometimes they will stay in the house that they have set on fire, and they will die in the fire. A few case studies have reported positive outcomes with behavioral interventions such as aversion therapy. Very little systematic work is available on the etiology or treatment of pyromania, mainly because it's so hard to pin these guys down. Anyway, and that's the end of that chapter. I promised you that we would start on chapter 12. And chapter 12 has to do with substance abuse. There we go. Substance abuse and addictive disorders. This is a problem not only on this reservation. Actually, it's not as serious a problem here as it is in the northern plains. There are problems with drugs and alcohol far more severe than they are here. As bad as it is here. So, there you go. Almost all cultures throughout history have used substances that have psychoactive properties, substances that modify mood, perception, or brain function. If we look at most of the American Indian tribes pre-Columbian, most of them did not use any psychoactive substances. I guess peyote was used in this area to some minor extent, but of course there were no psychoactive substances. Marijuana, of course, is a tobacco. It's not really a psychoactive substance. But marijuana is a Chinese herb. Alcohol, of course, was not common here. It wasn't used here. So it was just really not that common in this culture. Of course, alcohol was used in China. Alcohol and yohimbine were used in Africa. Europeans have been heavy drinkers for an extended length of time. But this culture, of course, not so much. Commonly used psychoactive drugs include alcohol, opiates, nicotine, caffeine, and many others. So if we look at all of these, caffeine is very common over in Africa. So where does all the caffeine come from? I drink Mountain Dew. Where does my caffeine come from? Sheldon's back there with a Coke. Where does his caffeine come from? Is it in the cola nut or something? You've got Dr. Thunder. I don't know. What does it taste like? Is it tastes like Dr. Pepper? So where does caffeine come from? Where does the caffeine come from that is in Sheldon's Coke? My Mountain Dew.
From the lab? Is it a plant, like a fruit?
Yeah, sure. Of course. Comes from someplace. Where's it come from?
Caffeine or the
East Asia?
No, it's an apple.
Coffee bean?
Coffee beans. All of our caffeine comes from coffee. I know. All of our. I know. I know. So when they decaffeinate coffee, when they make decaffeinated coffee, when they make decaffeinated coffee, they take the caffeine from the coffee bean or whatever should have been in there, and they put it in your Coca-Cola. So that's where it comes from.
Decaffeinated, they take out the caffeine?
Well, that's what decaffeinated coffee is. Most coffee is decaffeinated to some extent. Well, some of it is. That's where it all comes from. Substance involvement ranges from occasional intake to complete dependence and compulsive use of drugs capable of destroying a person's life. What time do we start? 3:50? 4:20, thank you. I can't remember what time it is. The term addiction is widely used to describe particularly chronic patterns of substance use, but the DSM-5 does not include it in its diagnostic terminology because of its uncertain definition and its potential negative connotation. Curiously, the DSM-5 names the general category of these types of conditions substance-related and addictive disorders. And that's what we're talking about today. In the DSM-5, substance-related disorders are divided into two major classifications: substance use disorders and substance-induced disorders. Substance use disorders, a pathological pattern of behaviors related to the use of substance. The substance-induced disorders are results of substance use, intoxication, withdrawal, and induced mental disorders. And so that's substance-induced disorders. The DSM-5, the distinction between substance dependence and substance abuse, was eliminated. The behaviors to which these terms referred are now incorporated into the criteria for substance use disorders. The DSM-5 considers symptoms to be loosely organized into four general clusters: impaired control over use of the substance, social impairments that result from use, risky use of substance, and pharmacological criteria. Tolerance is a need for increasing amount of a substance to have the desired effects. Withdrawal, a specific psychological and physiological reaction to discontinuation of a substance, which can be relieved by taking the substance, and that's withdrawal. Neither tolerance nor withdrawal are required for the diagnosis of substance use disorder. Okay. Generally, at least two of the criteria are needed within a 12-month period to qualify for a diagnosis of substance use disorder. Severity of the disorder is specified in terms of how many symptoms are present. Mild is indicated by 2 to 3 symptoms. Moderate is indicated by 4 to 5 symptoms. Severe is indicated by 6 or more symptoms. The course specifiers are used to distinguish whether the disorder is an early or sustained remission in a controlled environment or on maintenance therapy. Symptoms are controlled by an agonist drug, and the agonist drug is usually naltrexone. Typically, substance use is continued knowing that a persistent physical or psychological problem is being caused or made worse. The pattern of use produces significant social or occupational problems or interferes with fulfilling major role obligations in life. It is this continued use of the substance despite significant distress or impairment it causes that is central to the diagnosis. The use the fact that you are using it despite you know that it is causing problems in some aspect of your life. This disorder category has been reliable with the DSM-3 reliability reported at 0.80 or above. DSM-5 field trials report 0.40 for alcohol use disorders. Males are more likely to receive substance-related diagnosis than females. The DSM-5 indicates the 12-month prevalence rate for alcohol use disorder in adults is 8.5%. Why? What's going on with you with females? Why don't you guys have the same problems that males have? What's wrong with men? We're talking about ADHD, we talk about all of these problems, far more men than women. So what the hell's wrong with guys? What's wrong with men? Why are we so susceptible to all this stuff? Why are we more susceptible to substance abuse? Are we that stupid? What's going on with guys? What's the difference between men and women
Peer
besides...
pressure. Peer pressure?
Is it stronger with men than women? I'm not saying you're wrong, it's actual.
They don't let their emotions out.
So we need to punch people more frequently? Now we need to express ourselves more. Is that what you're saying? And then we wouldn't have all these problems. Okay. We wouldn't have to get drunk so much. Okay. Or smoke so many doobies.
They can talk until after they get drunk.
Yeah. You can cry.
Cry after they get drunk.
So yeah, that's like.
Well, turn around and look at the back row. Tell me what's wrong with
Men push them.
it seems like
I think it's their upbringing, the men and depending on like if my people or
they told you had to do drugs.
the upbringings were different. The girls, you say women, I'm thinking girls that have
They're control betters?
They have children. You say girls, and maybe something that's, but anyways, their upbringing is different, so you have a different reaction to those things.
So who's controlled more, men or women?
Controlled more or controlled?
Who is controlled more?
Men.
A male?
Yeah.
Men are controlled more?
I think so, because in a relationship, female plays a more dominant, like traditional stories, it states that the female is the one that has control, where
Okay, so women have...
without the woman, then the men go crazy.
That's true. In Navajo,
So,
from
yeah.
Navajo perspective, yeah.
Now,
Short
perspective.
So
So
men
with-
need to be controlled by the women.
Yeah,
Men need to be controlled by the women, but what happens if the men aren't controlled by women?
they go crazy because there's too much distraction. What do you call it?
So is that what's going on? The men aren't being controlled enough by the women?
I think, well, I mean, if you think about it too, if you're talking about marriage, it usually happens like they settle down when they get older, so like
Sure.
when they're teenagers, then
Well, that's what I'm going to say next. Look at this, 18 to 24. Okay. So 18 to 24, are we really controlling the men? Or are the women really controlling the men? Or are the men just going wild? Rumspringa. The Amish, Rumspringa. It's where when they are teenagers, they have to decide whether they want to join the church or not. And they go through what they call Rumspringa, where they just do whatever the hell they want to do. Some of these kids do all kinds of crazy things. Rumspringa. No, none of you are Amish, so you don't really know what I'm talking about. Okay, well, I guess that fits. So the problem is the women aren't controlling the men.
It comes from back to where you're how you've been raised.
And if you're not raised where the women actually do control the men, when they're 18 and 19 and 20 years old, or 21 and 22, 23, 24, if they're not being controlled by the women, then they go crazy. Is that what you said? Gee, this seems to fit with all the statistics, doesn't it? Okay, people aged 18 to 24 years have high prevalence rates of nearly all substance use disorders, 18 to 24, relative to other ages, and we already know that males are more susceptible to substance abuse than women are.
Wouldn't there be like limitations?
I'm sorry? What?
Wouldn't there be like limitations to control? Meaning that there's so much that you can control and then you can't control. Like for an example, you have to answer your phone. So it's my wife.
I was hoping it was my wife.
But
If it was somebody else, I wouldn't have wanted to.
I mean, a female's like, she's there to bring balance. I guess not control, but balance to an individual of a male figure.
Okay.
But there's limitations to where, like, putting a chain and a ball on your husband and saying you're only staying here, or closing all the doors and saying you're not going out today.
Where is it that you want to
would there be
go?
limitations?
Where does he want to go?
Yeah.
What is it that you want to go out? You want to go out and be crazy or wild? Is that? I don't know.
Nisha, are you going crazy?
Am I going crazy?
Yeah.
Right now, I'm. Remember the 18 to 24-year-old? I'm like 4 times that old. So I don't think I'm going crazy at this point. Not only that, but I was married at 19. I had my first kid at 19, so I was under control almost right away. Yeah. Then my wife left, and I had to take care of the kids. Yeah, that was before I was 24. I should have gone crazy, but I didn't. I stayed sane, I guess. This class of substance-related disorders does not involve the maladaptive pattern of substance use itself, but rather the syndromes and consequences produced as a result of recurrent ingestion. Substance intoxication, substance withdrawal, cognitive and psychological impairments caused by the substances. Substance intoxication is a reversible change in behavior and cognition that occurs in a short time after ingestion of a substance as a result of the substance's physiological effect on the central nervous system. We have studied all of the drugs in drug use and abuse. It's fascinating because some of them hit you very, very rapidly and some not so rapidly. Like LSD, it takes an hour for LSD to get into your system. But it stays in your system for 4 to 6 hours. That's LSD. How about alcohol? How quick does it hit your system? As soon as it gets in your belly, but you don't have the peak of your intoxication until an hour to 90 minutes after you've ingested your alcohol. Okay, but it clears your system relatively quickly. How about marijuana? Well, marijuana gets into your system almost instantaneously. And how long does it take to clear your system? 28 days. My God, it stays in your system for like ever. So it really all depends on what you're ingesting as to how rapidly it gets into your system and the effects that it has on you. Onset of substance intoxication typically occurs within minutes of use and resolves as the body metabolizes the substances. This is usually done by your liver. Your liver takes all this stuff out. The manifestation, and the more of these toxins that you put into your system, the more damage you're doing to your liver. So be careful of your liver. There's a reason why it's called the liver. It's because you can't live without it. You need your liver. We can put a new liver in your gut, but we can't. I know. We can do dialysis if you've got bad kidneys, but we can't. There's nothing we can do for your liver. Nothing. So once your liver's gone, you are SOL. And L stands for what? Onset of substance intoxication typically occurs within minutes of use and resolves as the body metabolizes the substance. I was working in the hospital. I worked in a transplant hospital, okay? No, I didn't. I worked in the hospital. We were the ones that harvested all the organs. The hospital down the road was the one that transplanted the organs. And we had this little kid, we had this little baby, he was about 18 months old, yellow as the day, I'll tell you what, yellow as the sun in the evening. He had, his liver was dying. He was a problem. And we finally found a liver for this kid. Now, you can't put an adult liver into an 18-month-old baby. So we had to, we found anything. Liver to put in that kid. Why am I talking about this? Oh, your liver. You can't live without your liver. He was days away from death. He was days away from death when we found him a liver. It was really a touch-and-go situation. Oh, it was sad, too, because he's the sweetest little guy in the whole wide world. And here he was, his liver was dying. He had infant, it was a degenerative liver disease, really kind of sad. Anyway, don't worry, we saved his life. And the baby that died, we transplanted 2 kidneys, we transplanted 2 lungs, we transplanted the liver, the heart, we transplanted the heart. So we saved all those lives. The manifestations of intoxication can vary widely between individuals who take the same substance, and they can be affected by dosage, tolerance, and expectation of the effect. Substance withdrawal is a substance-specific syndrome involving behavioral, psychological, and cognitive changes that occurs after the cessation or reduction of substance use following a period of prolonged use. Symptoms of withdrawal are usually the opposite of symptoms of intoxication. Nearly always accompanied by craving, the administration of the substance reverses the withdrawal syndrome, and of course, that is how you get out of your withdrawals. Hair of the dog. So if you're an alcoholic and you wake up in the morning and you have a hangover, what's the best cure for your hangover? No. No. You drink water, all you're doing is rehydrating yourself. It's not really going to take care of your hangover. The only way to take care of your hangover is to drink some more alcohol. That's the only way to do it. Okay, I'm not suggesting that you do that. I'm just telling you that the best way to take care of the withdrawal symptoms is with the drug. Withdrawal syndromes occur with many but not all substance abuse. Withdrawal syndromes are described by the DSM-5 for alcohol, for caffeine. Does anybody use caffeine? Anybody drink a lot of coffee?
I
Do you have withdrawal symptoms when you don't have your coffee in the morning? You don't have withdrawal symptoms? You guys may not be sensitive to caffeine. Okay, yeah, but you drink it anyway. You like the taste, right? Okay. All right. Somebody that really is sensitive to caffeine, they'll drink a lot of coffee, but if they don't drink coffee, they get the shakes. And they start having headaches. And those are the withdrawal symptoms. It's the shakes that drive me crazy. Because I got like the steadiest hand in the whole wide world. I'm like 100 years old, and look at my hand. My God, what's wrong with me? No, something's wrong. Like caffeine, cannabis, tobacco, stimulants, opioids and sedatives, sedative hypnotics, or anxiolytics. No caffeine use disorder yet exists. Caffeine is not considered a substance that you can abuse. Well, you can abuse it, but we don't have any withdrawal symptoms. We don't count it as one of the things that you can withdraw from. DSM-5 does not identify a substance withdrawal classification for hallucinogens or inhalants, including solvents. Withdrawal symptoms can be severe and may be associated with perceptual disturbances and seizures, but in many cases they are mild. Of all of the substances that you can take, everybody thinks that heroin is the worst thing that you can do. It's easy to overdose on heroin because heroin puts you to sleep. It knocks out your respiratory system, stops your heart from beating, and then you die. But it's not the worst as far as withdrawals are concerned. If you had a heroin addiction and you wanted to get off of it, we could put you in some form of rehabilitation. It'd only take you 5 or 6 days to get off of heroin. The problem is that people don't want to stay off of heroin. It feels too good when they use it. The one that kills people the most is alcohol. You almost never hear of somebody having seizures from opiate withdrawals. But alcohol withdrawals is very common. I had a friend up north. He was a bit of a drinker, and he would have alcoholic seizures, and it had to do with his withdrawals. One time I was having this really strange conversation with the guy, and all of a sudden he had a seizures, like he had an epileptic fit right there on the spot. He just started foaming at the mouth and collapsed on the ground. And I tried to keep him from banging his head. He was hitting his head on the cement. And he was don't worry, I know you were scared that he actually died of a seizure. But people do die of alcoholic seizures. The most intense withdrawal symptoms generally subside within a few days. Although subtler symptoms can persist for weeks. And of course, alcohol is the worst. In addition to intoxication and withdrawal, substance-induced disorders include conditions in which other mental disorders such as depression and anxiety are induced by substances. In general, the more sedating drugs tend to induce depressive disorders, while the more stimulating drugs tend to induce psychotic disorders. And of course, this can be a problem. So if you're using crystal meth, or you're using cocaine, or you're using speed, the reality is that when you are high on that stuff, you're actually in a psychotic episode. And the more you use it, the more you will drift into psychosis. I told you the story of my young friend up in Montana, was a meth head. And one day she used, and she didn't know who she was. She thought she was a Mexican lady whose father had murdered his mother. And actually her father was dead and her mother was still alive. But she claimed that her father had murdered her mother and buried her body in the backyard of her house. So she gave them an address. It wasn't her house. And they went and dug up the backyard. Eventually she came out of it, okay? She came out of her psychosis. But I tried to warn her that if she ever used crystal meth again, she might permanently drift into psychosis and not be able to come back. She would be that Mexican chick for the rest of her life who spoke Spanish, but it wasn't real Spanish. She was actually an Inuit. She was from Alaska. Her mother was from Alaska, and her father was from Fort Belknap. But she was certainly not Mexican. She didn't have any Mexican in her whole ancestry. Yet here she was. She thought she was Mexican. Anyway, okay, so that's what's going on with the psychotic stuff. Some substances are associated with a greater risk of dependence and abuse than others. Generally, faster-acting substances present more of a risk of dependence, and methods of administration that deliver the psychoactive components of the drug to the brain more quickly are associated with higher degrees of dependence. So the quicker it gets into your system, the more psychoactive it is, and the more likely that you will become dependent on it. What is the most addictive substance known to man? Sorry? No, it's number 2, number 3. Ibuprofen? No. Is it addictive? Do you find it addictive?
Not me.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering. Okay.
I see like people like take it all the time, whenever they have pain, like just little minor pain.
Yeah, it's nicotine. Yeah. First time you smoke, you're hooked. As strange as that may seem. And it's immediate. Of course, it goes down into your lungs, the nicotine gets into your system, and it raises your dopamine level. And it feels good. It feels good. If you don't vomit, of course, it feels pretty good. So it's the most addictive substance known to man is tobacco, or nicotine in the tobacco, actually. Nicotine tops the list of most dependent producing substances. There you go. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, tobacco use accounted for 438,000 deaths in the United States in 2001. Is that all? Just 500,000? That's not so many, is it? I mean, we can put up with 500,000 deaths, can't we? If we had 500,000 traffic accidents, do you think we'd be doing something about it? Yeah, probably not. Nearly 1 in 5, 20% of all deaths in the country are due to tobacco. Nicotine use is the leading preventable cause of death. And of course, it causes all kinds of interesting problems like heart disease and lung disease. Who just died of COPD? Barbara Bush just died of COPD. Tobacco kills more Americans than human immunovirus, illegal drug use, alcohol use, motor vehicle injuries, suicides, and murders combined each year. So tobacco is the #1 cause of death in the United States. And we can let's make it illegal so that people won't smoke cigarettes. Would that work? Probably not. Substances to which it is easiest to form an addiction and to which it is most difficult to quit. Up on the top, of course, is nicotine. Then we have methamphetamines, crack, crystal meth, Valium, Quaaludes. That's what Bill Cosby was using on the women that he was raping. He was using Quaaludes on them. Seconal, alcohol, heroin, crank, cocaine, caffeine, PCP, marijuana is way down the list. Ecstasy, psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, and mescaline is on the bottom. It's not addictive at all. Some things you can't overdose on, and one of them is mescaline. Another one is LSD. You can't overdose on LSD. You can get enough LSD in your system with a micro drop, or you can drink a whole gallon of the stuff, and you're going to have exactly the same effect. Anyway, so you can't overdose on LSD. Relapse rates are similar for persons dependent on alcohol, nicotine, and heroin. Similarities in relapse rate curves across different addictive substances imply that common mechanisms of addiction can be identified. And that's because of the dopamine loop that we were talking about before. Conceptualizations of substance use disorders, moral failure model. Once upon a time we thought it was a moral failure, and that's why people were addicted to substances. That was the Victorian idea. The physical disease model is another one, and that's fairly prevalent today. If you've ever heard of Alcoholics Anonymous or any of the other anonymouses, those operate on the disease model. So the idea is that alcoholism it's not a weakness of yours, it's not a problem, it's a disease that you have to get over. So we have to treat diseases, right? Isn't that how you cure a disease? Is through treatment, and that is the idea behind the physical disease model. The other model is the interaction model. Addiction reflects both biological and psychological factors that together have produced a brain that craves certain drugs, and that is the interaction model. And then there's a fourth model, it's the environmental model. The idea that you start using a drug that is common in your environment, and the environment keeps you using the drug. So if you grew up where I grew up in a dry county in Indiana. If you grew up where I grew up, then the environment was not conducive to drinking. You had to go someplace else to find your alcohol. And since it was such a pain in the tail, in order to see how I didn't say ass. I know, I'm such a good boy today. Since it was such a pain in the tail to go find your alcohol, people didn't do it. So we fixed it, or we fixed something. Anyway, that's the environmental model. Okay. Alcohol dependence tends to run in families. Stronger genetic influence for males than females has been reported. Genetic influence may be specific for particular substances. There is some evidence that children of alcohol-dependent parents are at higher risk for alcohol dependence, but not dependence on other substances. Well, how does this work? Well, I'll tell you how it works. It seems to have something to do with if the mother drinks during pregnancy, then she's ingesting alcohol. The baby is getting gets the alcohol through its blood. Then it will be cleared out through its kidneys. It will urinate it into its amniotic fluid, and then it will get the alcohol over and over and over again when the baby swallows the alcohol. So it gets a taste for things. So Italian babies who get all that oregano from their Italian basil, they get a taste for Italian food. Isn't that the way it works? Mexican babies who get a taste for all the chilies and whatnot, right? So they get a taste for this stuff. So when they are old enough, they have a taste for this kind of stuff. My daughter, my wife was, when she was pregnant with my daughter, ate all these cherry peppers, those round things. I know. So now my daughter loves anything that's hot. It's really kind of bizarre. She eats hotter food than I do. I can't tolerate practically anything. I guess it's time to stop. We'll stop right here. We'll pick this up next time. And I won't talk about, yes I will.